Today's live stream is on Pluto Uranus. So, kind of like I mentioned with Pluto Saturn, but even more so, we're in a different realm now, right? Those who have a Pluto Uranus conjunction and are alive were likely born in the 60s, right? Pluto Venus, you could have been born anytime. So, we're looking at a very existential planetary relationship that both corresponds to really profound and significant evolutionary cycles. And since both Pluto and Uranus are dealing with a more soul level dimension of our own being, when they are in a very tight relationship with each other in aspect, we're looking at something deeper. And to actually understand it requires stepping back for a moment and reconnecting with what is the soul. When we teach Pluto, which is all about the desire nature of the soul, what is it that we're really talking about? Because we want to actually drop into a deeper insight and understanding of what does it really mean when Uranus and Pluto come together. And so I want to give some time in the beginning of this class to introducing that. This will be focusing on the inherent relationship between Pluto and Uranus. Okay, great. I'm getting a warning that my something. Just make a comment. Let me know that you're hearing me fine. YouTube's telling me something, but I don't know what it's telling me. So I'm going to share a few slides, and these slides actually come from a talk that I gave with the Jeffrey Wolf Green Association of Evolutionary Astrologers last year. A talk I gave on how Uranus corresponds to long-term memory. I'll post it in the description. It's a really great talk, one that will actually really help you to grasp the essence of Uranus and what it speaks to in the natal chart. So I'm going to share a few slides, and this is going to highlight the inherent relationship between Pluto and Uranus. And let me just start by grounding in the idea that Pluto corresponds to desire. And let's quickly review what that corresponds to. So if you're walking through life and you're seeing things, witnessing people, okay, good, thank you. And you're having certain internal reactions. This person is, walking hand in hand with someone else, and it's going to elicit jealousy or a feeling of competitiveness, all kinds of possible internal emotional experiences. This points back to the deeper soul content that we're working out, meaning what is that triggering and eliciting within me? Where do I fundamentally feel insecure and am not sourced in my own power? This is why 1,000 people will have 1,000 different perceptions to seemingly the same event in life, because we have a different soul program. We have a different evolutionary program, which translates to we're all working out our own desires. I have a desire to be liked and wanted and approved of, and I'm fixating on a particular object, experience, person, place, thing that I've determined will give me that. With Pluto, it's infinitely helpful, and I find this for myself, to continue to deepen in our insight into how essential desire is. That desire really is the name of the game here. Because everything's going to point back to this fundamental question, what do I really want? What is it I really want? And we might tell ourselves certain things, but our internal desire nature is going to speak to us from within first. It's going to tell us what we're really concerned with, what we're deeply invested in, where we're attached to outcome, where we're deeply concerned with gain and loss, where we need certain things to work out a certain way, where we're going to feel strong craving or strong aversion. This is our soul program. And we're continually forming relationship and engaging in experience and becoming more self-aware and moving on from experience and coming into new experience. And each time we uncover more of who we are, we unravel and connect with and embody more of our essential power. and we know ourselves to be different. After that really powerful or difficult relationship, we learned all these lessons. We identified our shadow and our attachments and our hooks. We moved through that and we moved on. We know ourselves different, and there's a greater resiliency and a greater capacity to walk in life with our strength, with our wholeness. And yet it's an ongoing process until we get to the point where the only and the fundamental core desire within us is that desire to remember who we are. And in a way, that's the essence of Pluto. This ongoing journey of generating desire, playing out experience, meeting what's inside, exhausting that desire, and moving on to something else. Until, in a sense, there's nothing left but the truth. That's how Jeff Green describes the evolutionary journey. The exhaustion of all desires until the only desire remaining is the desire to reunite with Source. And anything that's there that is not that is simply what needs to emerge. That's the evolutionary journey. All things need to arise. Everything needs to become emergent within our awareness, needs to be integrated. So that's the essence of Pluto. What I'll do right here is link that to Uranus. And this will actually really help us grasp even more deeply just how, what does it mean when I say Pluto is the bottom line? I highly emphasize and teach understanding the relationship between all planetary functions. Right? So you can look at Uranus somewhere and Pluto somewhere and kind of grasp how they inherently work with each other. It's a really helpful way of thinking. And especially philosophically, we understand the significance of desire. And I'll just say one more thing. And, check out my intro class, this whole series, where I really went into this. But I'll say one more thing on this. Without even getting too philosophical or cosmological about it, we can all simply accept that there's nothing that happens in our life, there's no experience, no event, no thought even, that isn't fundamentally conditioned by what it is we're working out on the inside. You can be walking on the beach, it's a beautiful sunny day, but the content on the inside is the thing that you're experiencing. And that's just true. We all know that. We can sit in meditation and the content that's arising is the content we're working out. So that's the bottom line. And meeting that, how do we work with that? How are we creating a life that allows us to facilitate and nurture this soul evolutionary process? And it's always about becoming more conscious of our own soul program and taking greater responsibility for the life experiences that we're having, because everything's pointing back fundamentally to our own inner reality. Our perceptions point us back to our desires. Okay, let's understand the basis of Uranus. So Uranus corresponds to the subconscious memories of the past, and this includes all past lives relevant to this one, right? Not all lifetimes correspond to the particular evolutionary themes of any particular lifetime. Jeff Green corresponds this to the Jungian idea of the individuated unconscious. And this is content that we're not necessarily aware of from the totality of life experience. I like to describe Uranus as sort of 360-degree vision. We're not cognitively processing the information that we're taking in. It's just happening. So you'll have a memory of something, and the Mercury dimension will identify particular events. That person was wearing a blue shirt. That was their name. This is how I felt about them. It's all very differentiated and categorized in the mind, because that's what Mercury does. Uranian memory isn't categorized. Once we're categorizing something, we're actually taking it out of its holistic experience and selecting very limited facets of it. A memory of an event includes all of it, and it's not categorized, and it's not differentiated, and there's no specific quality to it. Because the second you say, for example, you're all looking at me right now, but in your vision, in your hearing, there's an immense amount of nuance that you're not mentally consciously processing and identifying, oh yeah, in the periphery I see this blue lamp. If you close your eyes and I ask you, what color is this lamp, you won't necessarily know the answer, and yet it's being experienced. It's there. It's in the field of awareness. So that's Uranus. From the point of view of the soul's ongoing evolutionary journey from life to life, we contain the full memory of all experiences that have ever happened. But these aren't necessarily conscious memories. Most of us have no conscious memories of these. And yet they condition, to a significant degree, our current life experience. So we're going to meet someone, we're going to see someone in a blue dress, and we're going to feel something. It's going to elicit something in us, pointing to our soul program, but linked to particular past experiences, right? Like what we feel is kind of eliciting what's wanting to be worked out. But the actual trigger of seeing a blue dress might correspond to some past lifetime where you're getting married in a blue dress and your, spouse walked out on you. There are all kinds of experiences, senses, smells, sights, visions that will trigger these memories without any conscious awareness of the memories itself, because that's how the Uranian function works. And just, you can test this yourself. If if I give you a logo of a popular brand, your mind will know what that logo corresponds to, even if you've never consciously thought about it. You're just seeing it all the time. We're going to see certain things and we'll immediately associate that with particular memories, or we'll feel, and we won't even know what memories we're associating it with, but we'll have the internal experience of it. Thus, these Uranian memories are subliminal. And what subliminal means is they're below the threshold of conscious sensation, conscious awareness, perceived by or affecting someone's mind without their being aware of it. Right? So a subliminal memory, it's happening underneath the surface, but we're not conscious of it. So that's an Oxford definition, to be exact. So when we think of the soul from the point of view of being a soul, our beingness isn't defined or identified inherently with, I'm in this body, my name is Ari. As the soul, there's just the continuity of experience. The soul, in its continuity of experience, might be manifesting within incarnation, within time, or it might not be. The soul is the soul itself. And so here we're, very much focusing within this time-space experience, and we're very much conditioned by the Saturn dimension. So we're seemingly experiencing life, manifesting on a seeming time scale, and yet all these different dynamics are emerging all the time. We tend to lack the appreciation. And so much of what's arising right now points to content within that is actually reminiscent of the past, the people that we're meeting, the experiences that are being recreated point to, they elicit that which we've already experienced before. And very often Uranus will speak to not necessarily the recreation of experience, but where certain experiences will be enough to trigger that subliminal memory of the past. So we might re-experience certain things from the past that aren't resolved. And thus so much of this life is conditioned by the unresolved content that we're bringing forward into this lifetime. We'll take it literally and we'll think our perceptions are accurate to what we think is going on, but so much of it is actually pointing back to what is unresolved within us, but not remembered. So Uranus memories are like the roots of a tree, in which all flows from those roots to the rest of the tree that is above the ground. The soul is the root ball itself, with the roots that emanate from it correlating to those Uranian memories. So let's unpack that. Think of the soul as the root ball, right? And all the roots come from the root ball. The root ball is the core evolutionary intention. why are you here? What are the underlying desires that are impelling and bringing us into this incarnational experience in the first place? Okay? And then the particular memories, the particular experiences, and the subliminal memories that we have of those experiences are the roots. But we want to understand those roots relative to the root ball, right? Why are those memories important? Why are they coming up right now? What are they pointing us back to? Well, they're pointing us back to the soul program. There's nothing that's happened in the past and isn't fundamentally relevant to our ongoing evolutionary awakening, our journey, right? Okay, we've had a past life where we were living on a farm and all of our crops were burned. And now we're, farmers, and we have a garden, and we're terrified with losing the crop. So we're neurotic about protecting everything. From a Uranian point of view, yeah, sure, you've had a memory. There's some past lifetime where you lost your crops, but that alone isn't really significant. Okay, sure, we've had a lot of lifetimes. We had all kinds of experiences, but what good does that give, right? How does that benefit us? We can objectify and say, okay, well, we're carrying this subconscious memory of having lost crops. So we can say this moment isn't the past, but Pluto is the why, right? Pluto is, what's the evolutionary program in the first place that brought you into these lifetimes? Do you get the correlation here? All of these Uranian memories don't exist in a vacuum. We all have our soul program. So we can think of these Uranian memories as simply pointing back to what is the underlying context of the soul that brought forward these experiences in the first place. So we're going to have, to a significant degree for all of us, these Uranian memories are going to be significantly suppressed. We won't want to remember them. We're going to meet people, have experiences in life that are going to point back these past memories that are uncomfortable for us, right? Maybe it's a memory of where we were in an army and we did things that we're not proud of, that we feel guilt about, right? So we're not going to want to deal with anything violent. We're going to sort of suppress that part of our being. Or it can be memories of various traumatic experiences that we've witnessed or experienced ourselves. And so it's arising right now, someone's getting close to us intimately, memories of being betrayed. We're not going to get close. All different kinds of experiences, and we're predominantly not aware of them, and so we're going to suppress certain experiences and feelings and emotions linked to where we're not wanting to contend with these unresolved dynamics from the past. As we evolve, right, as we begin to take responsibility and face the deeper soul content within ourselves, Pluto, these memories are going to begin to emerge, right? It's almost like all of this suppressed content begins loosening up. And the things that we didn't want to look at, that annoying person we just don't want to be around, or that topic we don't want to talk about, or the bridge that we don't want to go on because we're afraid of bridges, right? The feelings, the emotions, or the memories, or the flashes, or the sensations, or the experiences are going to be emerging that are going to be loosening up the past that we've suppressed. Because as we evolve, we're going to be connecting with, meeting whatever desires are needing to be fully seen and integrated so we can not be bound by them, so we can move on into the next experience. The roots, the root ball emanates from which emanates the roots, right? So as we're accessing more of the root ball, the core soul content that is the source of all of this, the roots are going to be providing information to the trees, to the branches, to the conscious awareness. Think of the branches as sort of the domain of consciousness, what we're aware of. So let's look at this from another angle, just to kind of, help clarify this. Uranus equals the roots, unconscious memories of the total past within the soul that conditions the majority of current life impressions and perceptions. The soul is the root ball itself, desire, bottom line reason for the evolutionary journey and the human experience in the first place. When we understand this essential relationship between Uranus and Pluto, it provides such a useful insight into understanding that in the natal chart. So I want to say one more thing on this introductory level. When you look at Uranus, we're going to think of Uranus basically on 3 dimensions. And this is a basic teaching that Jeffrey Wolf Green taught. 1, total memories of the past. That which we don't want to contend with because we're suppressing ourselves. So we don't want to deal with it. And this, by the way, could be a person, a relationship, a topic, an experience, or certain personal preferences, right? Maybe we really want to pursue a certain profession, but we'll suppress that because there are memories of being persecuted for being whatever profession in a prior lifetime, right? We're going to be I don't want to deal with it. And 3, it's the blueprint of who we become in our most individuated form. What that means is when we're not suppressing our individuality, our essential nature, there's a natural unfolding for our own being. There's a natural blossoming of our soul individuality when that's not being suppressed. We can think of Uranus fundamentally as our essential self, corresponding to our essential nature, meaning who we are as a soul without conditioning. And just really consider that for a moment. Who we are without conditioning. Conditioning is anything that has conditioned our sense of self. Personal memories of this lifetime, prior lifetimes, all different dynamics that say this is who I am. You take that away, you're left with who you are as a soul, your unique soul vibration, your unique soul individuality, which is not the same thing as personality. So there's like an awakening to but you don't, when we awaken to this being, it's not grasped. You don't define it or put it into a box because that's more conditioning. When that is awakened, it's just what we are, and it has you can't define it. Anything that's defined gets back into the realm of Saturn, and it's conditioned. And you can really understand from what I'm teaching, there is an essential relationship here between Saturn and Uranus, because we have the world of form and conditioning, and I'm teaching there's a box, there's a container here, all these forms and structures. But at the core, who we are is not defined by any of that. There's a great talk as well that I did with Jason Holly on Saturn Uranus, and that is also available on the Jeffrey Wolf Green Association website. I'll put that in the description below. So with that in mind, let's tune into the essential relationship between Pluto and Uranus. When you think about Pluto and Uranus, the desire nature of the soul, the concentration of desire here is oriented towards freeing oneself from the past. Right? The underlying intention here is to liberate the soul from all conditioning that it's bound up in. Naturally, with Pluto Uranus, there's going to be an intense amount of psychological concentration on deconditioning. That's going to be met generally in one of 3 ways, and often cyclically can go in either direction. Souls that will have an underlying bottom line focus to shed anything that intends to suppress or keep them from their essential nature, at whatever level of consciousness they're embracing that. This can mean anything that is keeping the soul stuck in the past. Thus, identifying and becoming aware of conditioning can become like a laser-like focus on, I don't want to be defined or limited by anything of the past that I've known. For some souls, this will be a gradual process, and that's going to happen by way of becoming deeply identified and merging with certain symbols that at some point represented liberation and freedom, but then at a certain point became outdated. For example, we have different trends or cultural constructs that at different moments in history were very popular. And yet, at a certain point, that is no longer popular. We'll see in the 60s, we had a Pluto-Uranus conjunction. So the whole hippie movement and a particular subculture or way of thinking. And yet, if that becomes crystallized as another identity, then that Pluto-Uranus is, I got to kind of weed that out. So there's a deep awareness, thus, of one's social surroundings. my friends, my groups of people. Uranus corresponds to groups of people and community because basically we're going to find ourselves in relationship to a certain status quo. And the impulse towards liberation is going to say who you are fundamentally isn't defined or can't fit into any particular box or social group. We always find ourselves resonating with other people of like mind who share a similar vibration, but that can be many different circles. And so we're going to find ourselves with our peers, our group, our classmates, our friends. And there's always going to be that Uranian element which says who you are isn't defined by that. Right? Perhaps everyone in this group, they're all into astrology, but you're the one person that is into Vedic astrology. And so you resonate, but then at some point there's a difference. And there needs to be that need that you have to embrace that difference. The Pluto Uranus fear is I'm so fixated on the belonging in whatever object focus I've decided corresponds to my freedom and liberation. Being a part of this fringe group, being a part of this community that is different, that is unique, and I'm accepted for who I am. Much of Pluto Uranus can correspond to the trauma and the subconscious memory of being persecuted for being different. We have so many Pluto Uranian people, in particular the conjunctions, all of you born in the 60s, right? When it was in Virgo. And even when it was separating with Pluto in Virgo and Uranus in Libra. Many souls born with the semi-square or the square. For so many souls, there's that memory of being persecuted for being the witch, being the astrologer, being the astronomer, doing all the things that mainstream society said, that's different, you can't say that, you can't write that book burnings, all these different things where you and the group of people that kind of resonated with that way of thinking were persecuted. So there can be an attachment and a security to being with the people that are different and like you, and that can be liberating. That can be for many souls, I'm creating a new political party, or I'm joining this new political party that resonates with who I am. But then that becomes the next place from which we need to liberate and break free, right? Break free from now that which has become overly conditioned and overly defined. And this becomes an ongoing issue with Pluto Uranus because the Pluto dimension wants security. Pluto is forming strong relationship. It's object focused. So what do I desire? Oh, yeah, I'm watching those. I want to be a famous astrologer, right? I want to give a talk at this conference. I want to be accepted by this group of people. And so there's that concentration energy within Pluto to actually get to the core of any particular group, to kind of get to the bottom line of any particular way of life, group of people, or community of people, and kind of get to the essence of it and even become an icon of it. And at the same time, you can have a soul that is deeply connected to it, but have the trauma of being told, you're different. You dress differently, or you think differently. You don't belong with us anymore. These are all different dimensions of the soul shedding and shedding and shedding all of its conditioning. So I want to read something from the Pluto book. This is on the section where Jeff Green talks about Pluto Uranus. Uranus, this archetype represents the urge in all of us to break free from external and internal conditioning that provides us with a sense of personal identity. So conditioning comes from a variety of sources. Again, this is what I mean by conditioning. It's all things. Society, family, friends, lovers, and our own memories of what used to be. These memories condition the very definition of our values, beliefs, attitudes, self-image, and so forth, and thus contribute to our attachments because of the familiarity and security that they represent. That's the depth of Pluto Uranus here, because we're fundamentally penetrating through, getting to the core of all conditioning, right? No soul alive is going to kind of get to the core of it all, because that runs super deep. Those that are on the path of awakening, we're going to be dealing with who am I that isn't fixated. Right? Pluto Uranus can be a profound, accelerated movement through all desire, because that Uranian impulse to liberate from the known and the Pluto desire for evolution says, I'm going to continue to concentrate on who am I, what doesn't come and go, what isn't conditioned. Well, That's conditioned. That's right. So all of the desires and the subconscious memories will have to emerge, linked to whatever is unresolved within us. So a lot of these Pluto Uranus souls, many of them have really strong memories. It's interesting. A lot of souls that have been through a lot of trauma, there's both some element of dissociation because of the trauma, right? So certain things will come up and they'll kind of dissociate. They can't meet it. But also a very strong Uranian memory. A lot of content from the past will sort of just be flooding the conscious awareness. Many souls that have those sort of Uranian psychic capacities to view remotely, to view past lives, to sort of access a dimension of reality where we're in touch with that Uranian mind, where we're seeing outside of the linear Saturn dimension. Many of these souls have also gone through a lot of trauma themselves, right? The idea is to ultimately objectify these memories and be able to see it all free of attachment. Because Pluto is always going to be attaching and fixating on a particular story, Uranus, right? Our conditioning equals a story of whatever it is we're not wanting to actually look at head on. And we'll liberate ourselves from that story by identifying it's my desire and resistance to change, my resistance to evolution, that's going to fixate on the past and give it a projection of a story. When I let go of that story, it's just there and I can't control it. It's going to open up. It's going to run through me. It's going to purge. It's going to purify. And if I keep myself free of grasping, I'm going to find out what happens, right? So that, again, there can be such a strong desire and impulse towards awakening. But let's talk about that too, right? You can sort of concentrate and really get into the non-dual spirituality circles. And then that becomes its own clique, right? Non-dual spirituality, and you know, you're watching the right teachers, you're saying the right things, you're talking the right lingo. All of that becomes another social construct that Pluto, you've gotten to the core of it. And I'm satisfying some part of myself now that wanted to merge with these symbols of liberation. But that's not liberation. So everything gets to become the next thing to liberate from. I love Adyashanti, and one thing he talks about, one of his deep awakening experiences, he had this experience sitting in Zen. This is my memory of his story. And by the way, I don't know his chart, but I'm pretty sure he was born in the 60s. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a Pluto Uranus. Maybe some of you can confirm that if you wiki him. So it's like mid to late 60s. Excuse me. He's sitting and he has a moment of, what am I doing? Right? It's like almost the whole practice sort of opened up for him. Like, and it was like, what am I actually doing here? I don't know how to describe it other than for a moment there was an awareness of someone trying to get enlightened almost, right? And he sort of saw that. And there was this immediate shift in perception. Everything sort of opened up in him. He goes home, and I think he said something like, he tells his wife, I woke up from Zen. And I love that line. I woke up from Zen. Because you don't wake up and stay in Zen. That's still staying in something. On the Saturn level, he continued practicing. And as I understand it, he practices to this day. Right? So you can have your Saturn form and definition in the parameters of our life, but on the inner Uranian level, you can just totally disidentify from any of the structures. So we have to understand that the essence of Pluto Uranus is really about eliminating all conditioning. And so the soul is going to be drawn to anything that's going to reflect back to the soul where they're holding on to that conditioning. And so there's going to be an immense amount of fear, usually. An immense amount of fear that's going to be circulating through the system. Most of the time, that fear isn't going to be understood. right? Because that Uranian memory isn't conscious, it's subliminal. So we're going to be experiencing, seeing things, having perception, and we're going to feel very strong visceral craving and aversion. But that Uranian-Pluto evolutionary intention is going to draw us to face it head on. And we're developing an objective consciousness to see things as they are, not through the filter of our own attachments. And that's penetrating, that is incredibly deep, because the desire fundamentally is to be free. So we can think of Pluto Uranus fundamentally pointing to the evolutionary necessity to shed the past so that the next thing can happen. What's happening with Uranus is there's always an evolutionary arc. And you can think of Uranus as like the greater algorithm, the intelligence of life in general. It's sort of beyond our comprehension. We can think of the yugas of like these larger 26,000 year cycles and whatnot. And there's an algorithm, there's an intelligence. And we free ourselves from whatever happened so we can actually move with the current of the rhythm of life. And that's why Uranus speaks to the blueprint of our own awakening. And it's sort of beyond my comprehension. It's what happens when we're not getting in the way of it happening. And so in a way, we can think of the Uranian journey as liberating from everything that we've known so that what is can be. And we're never going to know it. It's just gonna be. And so the Pluto dimension says this is evolutionary necessity. There is an era in your life where you played out this particular role, this particular form, because you were playing out these desires. And when you shed that, it's a completely new paradigm. And the night and day dimension with Pluto Uranus is so profound. I can't really emphasize this enough. I mean, so many souls who have that Pluto Uranus conjunction in Virgo. For many of these souls, there are these profound moments or periods in their life where suddenly everything that they've been doing ends because they see it was just playing out a certain level of experience. They're playing out their desires and working through the past experiences that kind of existed on that paradigm of whatever desires they were working out. And that desire is exhausted. And there's a completely new paradigm, right? It's like you're completely transformed and suddenly you're a different person. You're doing a different job, different community, you can have a different lifetime within a particular lifetime. That's how deep Pluto Uranus is. But what's often the case, and it's helpful if you can objectify this and understand it, there can be a perpetually unresolved trauma within Pluto Uranus, right? Where there's just a fundamentally deep sense of victimization and fear. Certain people, places, things, and events, and ideas and memories and contentions with the future are going to feel very threatening, right? Ideas of, well, I don't want that to happen. I can't talk about that. And we can be living in a loop, in a groundhog day of recreating the past over and over and over and over again. I refuse to go anywhere where anyone's wearing a blue dress. I got to make sure before I go there, hey, don't wear blue because I'm traumatized by blue dresses. And, by the way, caring for our trauma is good. And what I'm pointing out, though, is this can become a neurosis, especially in the Virgo dimension, because a lot of what's happening in Virgos, we're dealing with the imprints of losing control, inducing a deep sense of inferiority or smallness. Right? So there can be an underlying sense of victimization or powerlessness linked to these memories of having lost total control over doing and being able to sustain anything in our life. And so there can be this deep fear of dealing with change and dealing with reality. And many, many Pluto Uranus souls live their entire life like that. I mean, many of my clients are dealing with that deep, and a part of the liberation process is helping individuals to recognize that all of these deep fears, these places where I'm just like stuck and I can't seem to move forward, it's kind of pushing up against that very next threshold of realizing that I am not defined by any of this, right? I'm staying stuck in my identity. I'm stuck in who I know myself to be because I'm unwilling to claim more of my power. Because to claim our power and our freedom is to not be victimized and is to not be afraid. But I have to be afraid. I was so hurt. But what if you weren't? That's the profundity of Pluto Uranus. Just look at it, feel it, experience it, see it, process it, but don't give it a story. And we realize none of this is personal. That's like the most amazing thing here. None of what we've been holding on to is personal, because that Uranian realization is fundamentally the impersonalness. And this is really amazing because we've gone through traumas and horrors of all kinds. Humanity has and does, and probably will continue to do so for a while. And we've all had past that has been horrific in this lifetime and in past lives, for sure. To be able to see it, it's not bypassing it, but to be able to see it head on. And to realize that there needs to be a concentration of thought, a concentration of energy and attention, of life force, to make it personal. Without that, we'll feel it. There's raw energy, there's movement, but it moves. It's almost like there's an energy that's just sort of impersonal to us that wants to be experienced, like the anger, the hurt, the hysteria needs to happen. But it's not who we are. And that's amazing with Pluto Uranus. And we'll have moments, and we'll look at this. The charts that I got for you are just really great. I was up to like 2 o'clock last night, having a lot of fun with this. I don't know if that was a good idea or not, but we'll see there are these moments in history where Pluto Uranus enter into particular phases with each other. And we're going to have a lot of energy being liberated, right? This liberation of energy can also be traumatizing, right? Where we're realizing certain forces of oppression or suppression, and we're like, I got to free ourselves from that. Groups of people will come together for whatever cause, and that can be very liberating, but it can also be, this can be rebellious and victimized too. Like, I'm fighting against this force of oppression just as much as we can have many people sort of liberating and waking up to a more essential dimension of their own being. Okay. So let me just look at my notes here to see if there are any other things I haven't spoken to before looking at charts. Yeah. I mean, one more thing that I'll point out is oftentimes there's a need to go it alone. The liberation process here says, your community, your group of people, whatever it is that you've identified as your belonging, sometimes there's a need to not fit in. Everyone will misunderstand you. Everyone will think of you as an outcast, or you're going to do this new thing or embrace this quality of your own being that no one understands. You're going to quit your corporate job and become an astrologer. There may not be one person in your life that sees that in you. And yet you're going to follow the calling of your soul unfolding. And that will feel threatening and very scary. All of the attachments, Pluto, to belonging, Uranus, will come up. Right? All of these attachments to, I don't want to be too different. I don't want to be an outsider. I don't want to be persecuted. I don't want to be alienated. All of that will have to emerge to realize that you're free. And when you're free and you walk in your freedom, more people come, right? Transformation happens because all of the people that are resonant with this new dimension of your being will come into your life. And in fact, old people, many of them, will also change along with you. Everything follows you. Everything follows our soul program. Like a ship trails in the sea, right? The trails of the ship follow the ship. It's never separate from it. But we have to be able to kind of embrace that and go it alone sometimes. Uranus being community, but community being all inside, right? And we make these changes on the inside first, trusting it, and we see what happens. Okay, let me look at some comments here, and then I'll jump into some fun chart examples. Oh, thank you, Ari. Thanks for the comment. Uranus is conditioning from all of our past lives, and the impulse to be free of unconditioning is both. Yeah, and it's not all of our past lives, and this is a little bit beyond my own understanding, but it's all past lives relevant to this one. As I understand it, this life and the evolutionary program that we're working with in this lifetime is relevant to a particular series or theme of past lives. It's a Buddhist teaching that I've heard of that, not for all souls, not every single lifetime is relevant to all lives that has ever been lived. We have a particular sort of evolutionary curriculum that we're working through. So yeah, all conditioning from all the past relative to this life, and the impulse to be free of all conditioning. It is both. Both one implies the other, actually, because all conditioning points to whatever's come before. This will be available later. It's all posted on my YouTube channel. Oh, Adrian, interesting. You're undergoing this moment in regards to Eastern spirituality. I'm very curious to hear that from you. Right? I would love to hear more, because I've seen your chart and very curious, and I know a little bit about your path. Pluto Uranus in the 7th house. Okay, I've said this before when looking at this person's chart. That I'll probably come back to him a lot, because he has like so many aspects to Pluto. Here we have Pluto Uranus square. And it looks like this is a last quarter square. So there's a very strong need here to be breaking free from anything that's suppressing his own, Uranus, Aries, 5th house, right? The freedom of his own creative expression. I mean, he was basically this icon of sexuality and creativity that was taboo. It's like, oh, Aries, 5th house, he's so exciting. He's bringing up all these feelings in all these teenagers, right? Society is like, oh, that's inappropriate that you're shaking your hips. Relative to this Pluto, there's a strong underlying soul program to kind of get to the core of his own emotional security. This manifests as very deep attraction to the feminine, a desire to penetrate and osmose the symbols of Cancer, nourishing, female, right? That which is the yin, wanting to osmose it within. Very strong desire, sexual nature for women. Clearly, this is a soul with that Uranus Pluto working with an immense amount of creative energy and psychological energy. But what's happening fundamentally is this is a part of this soul wanting to liberate his life force and access his own, the depth of his own soul power. And there's that need to kind of push through whatever limits are keeping him from accessing that depth of being. And of course, there's a lot of addiction and obsession, and where we can associate certain objects as symbols of power and sort of be consumed by all kinds of addictions and whatnot. But I think he's a great example just for that impulse to liberate and open up all of that energy. Yeah, really powerful example of that. Okay, Mary Baker Eddy. I'm going to come back to her chart next week when I do... when I do Pluto Neptune. I'll probably come back to her again when I do my Neptune series, which I am going to do. So we have Pluto and Pisces in the 6th house. And I find this really fascinating because, let me get my mouse on it. Okay. Pluto's retrograde. It's at the very end of Pisces in the 6th house. If you don't know Mary Baker Eddy, she's the one who created Christian Science. And it's all about understanding that physical healing is rooted in spirit. The essence of her teaching, which to her is drawn from really the essence of what Jesus taught, is that fundamentally sickness is a mistake of the mind or confusion of the mind. And she teaches using the principle of mind, and that God is mind, is principle, and it's having accurate and clear thought about the nature of spirit. And then physical reality follows. So a big principle within Christian Science is we correct our thinking and the body follows. So Pisces in the 6th house is spiritual healing, right? It's seeing the body as forgiven. It's letting go of anything that keeps us in a state of suffering and difficulty and looking at God or truth or unconditional love as the source for all things. So it's about being able to identify the 6th house issues, by forgiving, clearing, healing the mind. And this Pluto in the 6th house is getting to the heart of, what is unconditional love, and how does unconditional love look at you? Well, unconditional love doesn't see you as sick. Now it's squaring to this Uranus in Capricorn in the 3rd house. It is about disciplining the mind to see things as they are. What's really interesting for her is she redefined the world that we see. So Capricorn in the 3rd house can very much be, this is my body. I'm defining my body in very earthly defined physical terms. She's saying the body is not physical, right? You can think of it in physical terms, or you can understand that there's only spiritual sense, and that all physical sense is a metaphor for spiritual sense. So it's looking from a higher level of consciousness and not seeing this physical crystallized reality according to more of the Newtonian physical way of thinking of it. But what does everything physical represent energetically? And these are my words. I haven't studied her deeply enough to use the right vocabulary, but how is every physical condition that we're identifying point to an underlying thought? And where can we correct our thinking by elevating our thoughts to a higher plane? For her, it was all about, there's a particular thought, let me take a moment to connect with it. She called it the science of mind, Uranus in the 3rd house. And liberating our thoughts about the body to reach the level of spiritual perception, to then cure and heal the conditions of the body, because we're not seeing it as a body. So this is a lot of energy, again, wanting to be freed up. She was actually sick with something that was sort of incurable, and she had a spontaneous moment of realizing some sort of spiritual understanding that it isn't her birthright to be suffering. It's not what Jesus taught either. So having that clarity of mind and then seeing the truth of her physical condition without the conditioning of the past, that brought for her a spontaneous healing, and she was able to use that perception to facilitate healing for many, many, many people in her lifetime. And she was totally persecuted by it, right? Like this wasn't another brand of Christianity. This is more about like spiritual healing, rooted in her own interpretation of what Jesus taught. But it didn't fit into the box of Christian thinking at that time by any means at all, nor does it so much today either. That's a really good example. Okay, Ram Dass. Like Elvis, he also has that Pluto in Cancer and that Uranus instead of disseminating phase square. Obviously, I mean, he's also another good example of Pluto because he has a lot of Pluto aspects. Pluto on the ascendant. I gotta walk my path, right? Squaring Uranus on the midheaven, conjunct the North Node, conjunct the Sun. I mean, this is one of those charts where, if this soul was just born, you would look at it and say, yeah, you're going to go through a lot of fundamental changes. We can say with Uranus on one level, this is about liberating from any kind of upper echelon status where we're associating position in society, accomplishment, role, accolade, status, all of those things as defining oneself. Right? So in his lifetime, he had the experience of being the Harvard professor. Then he had the experience of being sort of the hippie experimenter with LSD, right? Opening up those doors. From the 10th house Aries Uranus point of view, each has its own, the Harvard. I belong in that group. I'm, upper echelon. I'm respected. Then now I'm respected by this sort of subculture of people, and I'm rejected or pushed out, excommunicated by the Harvard school. I'm now on the outskirts, but I'm in a new subculture, right? He meets his guru, has this deep spiritual transformation, and now he's operating on a completely different level. And that Pluto is, I need to keep on going. Notice how each phase of his life was a different paradigm. Right? The Harvard phase was the Harvard phase, and that had its own colleagues. The LSD phase was its own phase. Timothy Leary. There are people that stayed behind in each phase as he moved on. Right? Timothy Leary stayed there. Timothy Leary, who was also from Harvard and did a lot of work with LSD, Timothy Leary, for his whole life, as far as I understand, stayed in the experimenting with LSD and, tune in, drop out, whatever, that kind of stuff. But Ram Dass continued to move on. And as we shed our conditioning, there's a new paradigm, an entirely new paradigm that emerges at that level of consciousness. So, to me, he's like the prime example of a Uranian soul. And then with that Pluto square, and it's that disseminating phase just before that last quarter. There's something that I need to change, and I'm pushed to continue to do it. I can't stay in the status quo. That particular phasal relationship from disseminating into last quarter is this push towards, I gotta let go of the past and keep on going. Fascinating chart, fascinating soul. Okay, Sinead O'Connor, in my talk that I reference on Uranus and the long-term memory of the soul, I spoke about her. I gave a more thorough example, including the nodes of Uranus, which is a very fascinating study. The nodes of Uranus are in Gemini and Sagittarius, north node, south node. Let me ground myself. Hold on. Okay. So she's amongst the Pluto, Uranus, and Virgo generation, 1966. And what this corresponds to, this soul had the memories of lifetimes of Judeo-Christian persecution and hypocrisy, right? Virgo in the 9th house corresponds to, on one level, Judeo-Christian cosmologies that induce a sense of inferiority and guilt. That will say, you are sinners, here are belief systems that will keep you small in a perpetual sense of shame and guilt and separation. Virgo is guilt, right? There's something wrong with me. And I have to atone for my sins, and so I'm never going to be good enough. It's also going to point to where various icons or leaders within these spiritual or religious groups, because Uranus will also correspond to groups, okay? So Uranus and Virgo in the 9th will be, the religious monastery, or the group of people that live in the religious monastery, right? Or a religious group of people. And then Pluto can be the abuse of power. So we have all of this hypocrisy and the abuse of power by the religious elite, right? The popes, the religious leaders. And she's, has that, she's famous for, well, many things, but in part, ripping the picture of the Pope after a Saturday Night Live performance where she sang a Bob Marley song protesting war. And she said, something about the Pope being the real enemy. And her whole point was the Catholic Church has been abusing children and has been lying about it. And she wanted to speak up against that. And this is all this hypocrisy and this trauma within the church, but also all the religious conditioning that teaches a deep sense of pain and suffering and inferiority. On another level, her soul was looking for the truth. So I'm shedding old belief systems, and I'm going to be misunderstood. Right? What happened when she did it? Lots of people hated her for that, ripping the picture of the Pope. And then a lot of people loved her for that. She lived her whole life speaking her truth and trying to work with the trauma of the past, trying to shed it. And this is very much through the lens of, I'm going to rebel from the past, speak out against it. It's the sun in Sagittarius and Venus squares that. So there's very much, I'm going to be a spokesperson for the truth, a lot of courage. The south node of Uranus is right there too. So there's a lot of imprinting around these past experiences and this need to break free of anything that's keeping her from the freedom of her own soul expression. She eventually converted to Islam, where she had her own spiritual realizations around that. And even then, the way that she embodied it and talked about it was very much contrary to whatever boxes other people wanted to put her into. She had this really great interview where she said, to me, this is not about I have to. If I don't want to wear the hijab, I won't wear it. I'm wearing it because I want to, And it brings a sense of belonging. A lot of what she spoke to was a sense of connection and family that she feels with people all over the world. Just everything for her was coming from this push to become more authentic in what she believes, how she lives, and what she's standing for. And she dealt with a deep sense of alienation and being misunderstood, and of course had a lot of struggle with mental health. We can see that with the opposition to Pluto, to Saturn, Chiron, as well. But she's a really great example for understanding this Pluto, Uranus, and Virgo. Okay. Briefly, George Oppenheimer, he was essential in developing the atomic bomb. And what I read was, and actually I have let me find the actual quote so I can read it to you. Only certain isotopes of certain elements can undergo fusion. An isotope is a variation of the same element with different numbers of neutrons in the nucleus. I don't know what I'm reading, but this is the part. Plutonium-239 and uranium-235 are the most common isotopes used in nuclear weapons. And apparently for a process called fission to occur, you need both plutonium and uranium. So you look at his chart, and you see a Uranus-Pluto opposition. And interestingly enough, this is very much in the realm of free thought, opening up the mind. That Pluto-Uranus opposition is huge innovations in science, but of course also we have the development of the atomic bomb, which was then used in a later cycle of Pluto and Uranus, which we'll look at that later. I just find that to be very interesting that he has that Pluto-Uranus opposition in his own chart. Maybe that's the extent to which I'll look into. I don't know much about him otherwise, but it was fascinating to see this chart come up, given the importance of plutonium and uranium. Okay, next chart. Okay, this is where we're going to go. So 1932, we looked at some charts, but this is also in transit. This is where Pluto is in Cancer and Uranus was in Aries. Part of what I was doing last night was researching the rise of Hitler and Nazi Germany, because that's when that was happening. Collectively, we had an entire country, an entire group of people that were feeling disempowered on the level of their social identity, right? There was economic issues with Germany. There was a deep sense of disempowerment, and the people needed something to believe in that would give them a sense of security. That was what was the whole focal point of the Nazi Party, strengthening the Aryan race and scapegoating other races as being the problems for the issues that we're experiencing. But it was all about Aries Cancer. I'm going to protect ourselves. We're going to fight to make sure that we're safe and that our perseverance furthers. And that group of people right there, they're the problem. It's very much, it pointed to that part of human nature that is not wanting to feel insecure, not wanting to feel weak, not wanting to feel powerless. And in order to feel secure, we're going to group together Uranus in Aries. We're going to form together and rally against a certain activism or cause. And that activism, that cause, is going to create a group sense of security. We're liberating from the past. We're shedding it. We're starting a new cycle. And we're going to feel safe. We're going to feel secure. The whole construct around the Holocaust and World War II is many German people living their life as usual, right? Parties, celebrating, and there's a lot of great music, all the while persecuting an entire other group or other groups of people in order to further preserve and strengthen the furtherance of their own race. And Cancer Capricorn polarity in general is Capricorn is race, country, borders, right? Cancer is your identity within that, right? So it's Cancer is your identity as a German person. Of course, Germany itself would be a Capricorn thing, right? So your national identity, and that's what I'm trying to point to, like your sense of this is what makes me who I am. I'm a white, blue-eyed, whatever German right? Like that's who I am. That's my security. And other people like me. Uranus. Let's form together and break free from the oppression of the past. That whole mentality, the rise of that, is one dimension of that Pluto Uranus. And of course, sociologically, there are so many other things that happened during that time. We had even leading up to that time, what did FDR do to get people out of the Great Depression? That's another idea of rallying together, to fight together, to work together, to get us out of economic disparity. You can look at strong Uranus-Pluto cycles globally, collectively, politically, and you're always going to find groups of people, for whatever reason, be it for fighting against injustices or creating their own terror, coming together that for them, it's breaking free from the limits of the past and finding something that will point to something that's more freeing in the future, but we're doing it together. We're going to form a group because I'm going to resonate with other people that share the same frustrations. I'm going to come together with other people that are also dissatisfied with how we're doing economically, and why is that Jew doing so well, or why are things like this? Let's turn an end to that, right? We're always going to see things like that when Pluto and Uranus form into these strong aspects on all levels of consciousness. Let's look at the next Pluto Uranus, and this will be the last slide for today. This was in the 60s. Usually when I teach this, I simplify it. And I just give attention to the Beatles, because just follow the trajectory of the Beatles. During the time that Pluto and Uranus were coming together, also Saturn opposite Uranus, was a transition from the older phase of the Beatles to the newer phase, of the psychedelic phase of the Beatles. Everything that was happening in the 60s was a radicalization and total transformation of consciousness. I'm getting out of the neat, tidy, good person, Catholic way of being, and I'm opening the mind. I'm connecting with something that is free, right? Relax your mind, turn off and flow downstream, as said John Lennon. Open up to the unknown. And this is a deep desire in the awakened in everyone at that time to liberate from the past cycle that kept us in a state of inferiority and smallness, and actually find, this is like technique, so meditation techniques, new ways of being, new ways of thinking, new practices that are opening up consciousness and revealing who we are beyond our own conditioning. We can say the Uranus, Pluto, and Virgo is liberating from guilt, liberating from inferiority, liberating from this huge conditioning and precedent that says you're somehow wrong or bad and need to be kept pushed down in a state of inferiority and smallness. And it's actually opening up to, also Virgo corresponds to how we take care of the earth. There's environmental awareness. What are we eating? What is our diet? A way to live that is free from the conditioning and the trance of the past. And there's so much to say about Pluto Uranus at that time, so I'm just pointing it out. It's an obvious historical correlation. I never read it, but I know Richard Tarnas has a great book, Cosmos and Psyche, where he speaks about all of these planetary cycles and goes really deeply into them. So if you want to really study that, check out his book for sure. Okay, let me go back into looking at more of the questions here. Yeah, how does guilt come into this? Are we attracted to guilt? We are attracted to guilt because from this point of view, let's say in Virgo, guilt will correspond to whatever conditioning of the past we haven't freed ourselves from. If I can sustain my guilt, I won't have to see the past differently. Or to say it differently, if I keep the same version of the past, I'm going to keep my mind in my conditioning and I won't have to heal or liberate from guilt. A lot of the times why we don't want to heal our guilt is because we don't feel that we are deserving of it. Let's say we were a Nazi in a past life and we did things that we don't feel proud of. There's going to be a lot of guilt there. And so there might be this sense, I don't want to contend with that guilt. I don't want to look at it. And yet looking at it, we can actually see it. And the Virgo polarity is Pisces. We can actually forgive ourselves and just simply do the Virgo thing, which is that was conditioning. I acted in those ways and I did those things because I was conditioned and I believed things that weren't true and I caused a crisis. Now it's time to clean up my act and act with a new level of consciousness, to see things differently and continue to move forward. And thus Virgo really becomes about how do we heal? Right? See, as we meet the guilt, often the guilt will inform a new way of looking when we're not suppressing and afraid of the guilt. How do we heal? How do we look at this differently when we're ready to actually repair and fix? That was a big part of it. Like, how do we heal all of the stuff, all of the war, all of the violence? That was what was opening up in society. How do we heal ourselves and our body and the earth and each other when we're willing to look at the same problems in a completely new way? And we have to be able to kind of meet the guilt first in order to actually get beyond it into this openness to actually see things differently and begin healing. So helpful in providing a larger framework for psychotherapy. Yeah, in particular, the question, why do I still have so much trauma when I've been in therapy for fill in the blank number of years? Absolutely. Is it possible Pluto Uranus opposition could lead to consequences in future lives? Oppositions often have another person on the other end of that. With Uranus, that is out of time. So let's say a person has Pluto Uranus opposition in their natal chart. It's not for me to speak to future lives as much as it simply says in their own life, via that opposition, there's going to be a dynamic tension within them between this need to liberate and the security attachments of the past that they're fixated on. They're going to be drawn to experiences or symbols that in some way will help them fixate and orient themselves beyond the conditioning of the past and move into a radical new phase of experience. Whatever changes they make and whatever choices they make is going to set the stage for the future for all of us. So to me, it's no different, the opposition, as to any other phase or aspect. Oppositions aren't always like literally about another person. Oppositions are about the contrast of experience, right? So there's object experience in our life, be it personally, socially, or just somehow in our life, something else is emerging that is contrasting what we know as familiar or safe or secure. Or both of them exist within us as a sort of push and pull dynamic. This is a good time to close. Thank you everyone for today's class. Hope that was as exciting and insightful for you as it was for me. I absolutely love looking at this stuff, especially when I get to, work with a natal chart where we have these prominent aspects and really get into the heart of like what's really wanting to liberate here. So next week we'll do Pluto Neptune, and that will complete my Pluto aspect series until I start with Neptune series, which will happen eventually. Reminder that I am available for one-on-one sessions. This is an opportunity to just receive support for your soul journey. I do this with couples. I do this with individuals. I have long-term soul-to-soul companionship, which is a way of working with me over a long period of time. So we kind of build more of a soul connection, a soul continuity. I also have a lot of classes and series available on my website. For those that want to study this work with me, I have a complete training program available. It's self-study, and then you can also join in any of the live cohorts every year when I teach these live cohorts. So you can check all of that in the description below on my classes page. And as always, thank you all so much for joining me today.